Well, let me jump in and introduce Marianne. We are so glad she's here. She's a writer, a speaker, a leadership coach, and a Presbyterian pastor. She's written numerous books. Her latest book is Hope, a User's Manual, which guides readers through confusing and isolating times. She is currently at Trinity Presbyterian in Herndon, Virginia, is a mom of three, and is juggling all the things just like we are. And we are grateful for her time and her wisdom this morning. Marianne, we're glad you're here.
It's very good to be here with you, and a real gift to have the chance to talk to you a little bit about some important topics. And I also just want to say it's fitting that I be with you this morning, because I was supposed to present last year at this event, and we were in a family mental health emergency that happened a few days before. And so I contacted Michelle and said, help. And Michelle said, it's good. Do not think about this event for another minute. But I am so glad to have the chance to make good on that relationship that is established and that is here. So I'm really, really glad to be with you. And in some ways, as hard as that particular event was in our lives, it has just, God uses all of this, and so what I am sharing with you today, let me go ahead and go to my old slides here. Hopefully, hang on a second before I do that.
Well, we are glad you're here today with us.
Yeah. All right. Hang on. Share screen, share sound. Let's see if I did this right. All right. Can you all hear? Okay. So you heard a little bit about kind of who I am. There's a personal and professional dimension to this topic for me. As Sophie said, I am a leadership coach as well as a pastor. Greetings from Trinity Pres in Herndon. And I also feel a little bit like, I don't know if anybody remembers those Hair Club for Men commercials where he said, I'm not only the president, but I'm also a client. I'm not only someone who thinks about these things a lot, tries to write my way into helping folks with thinking about how to live more abundantly as Jesus invites and makes possible. But this topic hits very close to home for me. We have three kids. One is a junior in college at Agnes Scott. Our middle is a junior, and our youngest is a sophomore in high school. And all three of them, just almost like clockwork, around about middle school, began to really struggle with their mental health. And it's a daily kind of struggle in terms of we kind of don't know what we're going to find when we wake up in the morning. And it has been clarifying in the sense of we root for and celebrate every victory. The end of my high school kids quarter is today. And that ends with this big exhibition where they take these morning module classes, and they have to then present on a topic that they've researched, and it's kind of for the whole school. It's a small school, but still they all kind of present to one another. They're both there doing their thing, and that's not at all a given, given the journey that we've been through. And that's hard to talk about. It's hard for some people to hear. And also, I feel like it's really important because I meet so many parents who, when they read the book that I wrote last year, that came out last year, Hope, a User's Manual, where I talk not exclusively about our first kids' mental health journey, but that's one of the things that's woven in the book. And people will come up to me and say, "Oh, me too. I was just at a retreat the other day or last week, where someone came up to me and said, I would love to connect with you sometime because we have some similar dynamics in our family. It's like we can't even say, just come out and say. And, it's kind of, we talk in code, right? But anyway, so this is all stuff that we just live with and what I have found as to be part of my mission in my ministry is to just talk as openly about it as I can in a way that preserves my kids' privacy and their own agency. And so what I'm going to do with you today is share some of the things. None of this originates with me. I'm a good Presbyterian, so I want to study everything. I read everything I can get my hands on about mental health. I take all of the classes. I do all of the stuff. And here is the distillation of what I have found the most helpful, not only for people who are kind of in active supporting of someone in a mental health challenge, but just good mental health hygiene. And so I'm going to share some of my favorite nuggets with you. And hope that can help guide your ministries for those of you who are serving in various ministry capacities, and for any parents who are here or who might watch this recording later. So I want to start by addressing a little bit of the why, and saying I'm not going to talk a lot about why mental health has become such an emergent challenge for our young people, except to say that there's a lot out there. There's a lot of folks who are blaming it on social media and saying this is kind of the smoking gun, if you will. And in my experience in talking to people and reading about that, I think it's too simplistic of an explanation to pin it on that one thing. I don't think social media is great. It has some good points about it. But the way I think about mental health comes from a class that my son took last year on sustainable agriculture. And James introduced me to a concept called non-point source pollution. Now, if you read my newsletter, which I'll include a link to in the chat in a minute, if people want to follow me there, it's called The Blue Room. I write every Friday, and I write about mental health. I write about spirituality. I write about the church, all kinds of things. And I've addressed this topic there. But the idea is that there's point source pollution, where you can look at a factory, you can look at a farm that drains its fertilizer into the river. Those are point sources of pollution. Like you can look at it and go, that smokestack right there, right? Then there's non-point source pollution that comes from the environment in general. And to me, this is the most compelling way to think about what's hard about being a kid right now, is that there are a lot of things in the environment that contribute. So I think in some ways, if we kind of want to say, well, it's that over there, in some ways that lets us off the hook of saying there are a lot of things that contribute to what's hard about being a kid right now. But another term that I learned from my son in that class is this idea of riparian buffers. And the idea behind that is that if you've got runoff that sort of is polluting a river or a lake, you can plant plants, right? And then you can see on your screen here that kind of act as filters. That can kind of help clean the soil, clean the land, so that the waters and the watersheds don't have as much kind of pollution in them. I don't understand how that works, but I think it's so amazing that nature provides a way for it to repair itself. And what I want us to think about today as church leaders and as parents, as people who shepherd children and youth through this really, in many ways, chaotic kind of world that we live in, that's not set up for optimal mental health, is how can we provide some riparian buffers? How can we be some of those trees and shrubs and plants that help filter out some of that gunk so that our kids can thrive. I want to brag on Michelle for a minute because I'm in a clergy group with Joe Clifford, whom you will hear from later today. And I think it's knowing what he's going to talk about. I think this is a great bookend. We're not going to talk about the same thing, but I think they complement each other well. But he was bragging about the program that Michelle has done there. And he said, I was walking by, this was a couple of years ago. He said, I was, and Michelle was with a bunch of 7th graders and they were doing like centering prayer or some kind of mindfulness meditation. And he's like, 7th grade boys doing mindfulness. That's the kind of stuff that provides the riparian buffer that can help kids thrive more easily. So having said that, I also want to say that one of the things that we are also facing is a kind of bias and a sensibility in our culture that doesn't have a lot of comfort with hard feelings. And so let me put a name in the chat. And I think she's one of the best people I have heard on teens, but also younger kids and mental health. Lisa D'Amour has a podcast, but you can also hear, she has also been on, let me put these two names in here. She has been recently on Ezra Klein's podcast and Kate Bowler's podcast. And one of the things she talks about is sometimes we identify something as a mental health challenge that's actually not a mental health challenge. And what she means by that is if kids feel anxious and there's something to be anxious about, we want them to be anxious. In some ways, if they're not feeling anxious over something that's anxiety inducing, that's the mental health problem, right? Or if they feel sad because they are having an argument with a friend, that's an appropriate feeling for them to have. And one of the things that happens with parents is, I mean, and I feel this myself, even though I've heard all of the cautions about helicoptering and not wanting to snowplow your way through parenting to clear out any obstacles for your kids. I know all that intellectually, but it's hard when they're actually in the struggle, right? And so even knowing that, I still can find myself feeling like, oh gosh, my kid's feeling distressed. I need to do something about this. Not necessarily, right? And so figuring out when and how to support while they're feeling hard feelings is part of good mental health. And so the goal of mental health hygiene is not to be happy all the time, but to feel appropriate levels of anxiety. When you have a test tomorrow, of course you're going to feel anxious, right? The problem is when that becomes debilitating and when you feel like you can't function in your life, right? So I just feel like that's important to kind of say up front. And we live in a culture that really prioritizes positive feelings. We're a very optimistic culture, assuming that we're all here from the United States. But I think it's true in other developed countries too, right? You walk through the airport and you see these billboards. I was just at National Airport some time ago and I saw this exact one. It will get brighter, right? Optimism. Here's another one. On the 10,000th try, there was light. This is just in the culture. And that's part of why it gets hard to talk about mental health, because that fights against this idea that we just need to think positive and everything's going to be okay. But don't discount how maladaptive that can feel to someone who is experiencing depression or anxiety. That is oppressive and not helpful. And it can kind of breed this sort of toxic positivity, which, I know many of us can probably point to examples, right? Dr. Susan George is a great psychologist who writes a lot about toxic positivity. And when someone's struggling, we want to jump in with kind of, it's going to be okay. You could, just go for a walk, those kind of simplistic things. And what happens when we interject those is that what we are doing is we are making our comfort more important than the experience of what the person is going through. When I say it's going to be okay, I'm really assuaging my own anxiety, not really doing what's helpful for my kid or whoever it is that is needing some support from me. The other thing that Lisa D'Amour, I think, talks about well in her work, and she has a book, she's got a podcast, all these folks have many, many ways that you can experience their work. But she talks a lot about different stages. And there are just stages of our kids' lives that are going to be more what she called quiet, in terms of they sort of kind of feel settled. And not always, obviously, there's exceptions to this. But she talks about 0 to 5 is a very tumultuous stage of development. You are just, that's self-evident statement. If you've ever watched a 0 to 5, they are just growing so much. They are experiencing a lot. It's a chaotic time of life, big feelings, right? 6 to 10 is often a little bit more settled. There's not as much turmoil. They call that the latency phase. And again, that's not always the case, but that was the case for our own kids. And then when they hit puberty, there's another level of kind of chaos that happens, big feelings, and not always knowing how to handle those. And here's one of the pieces that I think is really, really important to help parents get. And that is the idea that when a child comes to you and has some kind of issue, like maybe there's a bunch of like mean kid stuff that can happen in those kind of early, late elementary, early adolescent, where you're friends and then your friends turn on you, and it's just kind of a situation like that, and your kid comes home and talks about that. What they are needing from you, parent, youth leader, DCE, pastor, they need you to be your most settled, regulated self. And what I mean by that is I'm talking about regulated in your nervous system. And we're going to talk more about what that means in a minute. But when my kid comes home and is having some kind of crisis over something, and I meet their anxiety with my anxiety, what that communicates to what I'm trying to do is be empathetic, right? I'm feeling with them. But the problem is, if I'm feeling at the same level they are, what I'm communicating is, you thought this was a 13-year-old problem, but actually it's a 51-year-old level problem, right? What they need is not for us to say that's not a big deal, but for us to communicate that in our bodies. And I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, somebody, and feel free at any point, put questions or comments in the chat. I'm monitoring that as much as I can, and I'll be glad to address them. But what they are needing from us is our settled nervous system. One of the things that I have been on a personal crusade about the last several months is helping people understand the neuroscience of some of this. Now, I know just enough about this to be dangerous. There are probably people on this call who know more than I do, but there are a couple of pieces that have been really helpful for me that I want to share with you. And the first one is, I'm going to stop share for a minute because I want to just have you be able to see me. In fact, I'm going to make sure that I'm still in frame. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what we call the hand model of the brain. You can do raise your hand or give it a little raise hand in the Zoom if you are. But the idea is, if you make a fist like this, you put your thumb underneath and roll your fingers down. This is a good kind of model of how your brain works. And this is something you can teach to kids, right? And I think that many of them can kind of get this. But the idea is, here is your spinal cord, all of that data that's coming in through your nerves, through your body, up through your brain. This piece right here over the top, that's right here. And we're going to hear from the person who came up with this model in a minute. This is all your higher thinking. This is your prefrontal cortex. The way we can be on this call, having this kind of higher level conversation, is through this, right? This down here, your thumb, is your limbic system. These are your emotions. This is your fight or flight. This is the amygdala. This is the stuff that fires when you are under threat. All right. When you're feeling fear. Okay. Now, what happens is when any of us get activated, this and this are no longer talking to each other. So normally they're in a tight little bundle here. They fire back and forth and are talking to each other. But when my nervous system is activated, when I am anxious, when I'm in a traumatic kind of traumatized response, what happens is what Dan Siegel, and I'll write his name in the chat, he's the one that came up with this model. He called it flipping your lid. All right. So it's like this part of your brain and this part of your brain are offline. They are not talking to one another. And this right here is in charge. Now, what is helpful for me in this model is any of us who have dealt with preschool, toddler age, them throwing a tantrum, we know this is what's going on. You can't reason with a 4-year-old, right? When they are having a tantrum, you have to write it out and wait, get them to a safe place. If you need to take them out of the grocery store, whatever. And then later you can kind of talk to them in a little bit more of a processing sort of way, appropriate for whatever their age is. What I didn't realize, and I'd never really thought about, is when you have a teenager, they're capable of higher kind of processing and thinking, but they still flip their lids. I mean, adults still flip their lids, right? And so what I find, what I was realizing that I would do when a kid was feeling anxious is I would start to try to appeal to their upper brain, be like, just go and take that test, it'll be fine, you've studied for it, or help them problem solve in this moment. And what we have to do is help them get this all back into alignment first, before we get to the problem solving, the troubleshooting, all of that stuff. And I think this is, I mean, I'm teaching this to pastors to think about with their sessions. When a session is in an anxious space or a committee or whatever, and we double down into thinking our way out of it, that isn't going to work. We all flip our lid from time to time, okay? So what I want to share with you is just a little bit more. Yeah, let me look at my time. Yeah, I think we're good. And put in chat here the name of the, actually, before I do that, I'm just going to share. This is a short video on YouTube. There's tons of stuff about flipping your lid, and there's various models and diagrams and things, but I want to play just a few minutes of Dan Siegel, who is the one who spearheaded this. And he's talking about the different functions of the higher brain. And I think it's really helpful for us as we think about how we are with kids. So let me go back to here. I'm still sharing sound. Okay. Can you all see a YouTube screen on your? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and press play. We may not listen to all of this, but it'll give you, we'll listen to some of it, and then I'll say some additional comments.
The upstairs brain can control what's happening in the downstairs.
That's why it's
brain.
over top of it. Like
That's
that.
why it's over top of it. That's right. Yes, that's the reason it's there. It's actually the reason we can all sit in an auditorium like this for 2.5 hours rather than looking for berries or something. So we have this cortex, right? So now what happens is, if this thing is firing enough, this downstairs brain is firing enough, here's what happens. It fires, it fires, it fires, it fires. And pretty soon, it's going to make it so the ability of my upstairs brain to maintain the coordination and balance of the downstairs brain gets a little on the edge. And think of the experience of someone hanging off a cliff, right? You're hanging on, you're still hanging on, you're still hanging on, you're still hanging on, and you can feel yourself shaking. But what happens when you let go?
Yeah, eventually you're.
When you let go, you are going. It's the same way with the upstairs brain. It holds on, it holds on, it holds on, it holds on, and there's a bunch of parents smiling, so you know what's about to happen. This is now, let's talk about our brains. It's holding on, it's holding on, it's holding on, and suddenly the firing from the downstairs brain is too much. The grip is lost. And watch what happens. This is why it happens so quickly, you guys. This now no longer is coordinating and balancing it. That's the first thing. So now this is now erupts out because it's no longer contained, which turns this way, way off. So within 2-3 seconds, you go from kind of being a reasonable human being to flipping your lid. Has this happened to any of you? And let me just remind you, just because I know we probably won't talk about it, but it's worth just saying, I'm going to give you the list of the scientific things. We didn't put all this in the book. Oh, actually, we did put this in the book, but not as a list. Here are the 9 functions that this upstairs brain part right here behind your forehead allows you to achieve. Watch what happens if I can help my daughter Maria keep her upstairs brain working well so she's coordinated and balanced. She'll have these 9. But if her downstairs brain is so agitated and I can't help her name it to tame it and I can't connect and then redirect, if I can't do that stuff, she may get really agitated and she may start throwing things and have a big temper tantrum and do all sorts of stuff. And like, oh my God, I have a kid with, the dysregulation disorder or something like that. You know? Because it's all about relationships. I mean, there are people with disorders like that for sure, but I always want to ask, what's happening in a relationship first? So here's the 9 functions. Number 1, if she can maintain that, and if I as a parent can maintain it, I can regulate my body. I literally have 2 branches of the nervous system that are the brakes and the accelerator of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and sympathetic branches. Anyway, basically it makes my heart rev up, and my lungs breathe faster, and my intestines churn, or it calms all that stuff down. And how you balance the brakes and accelerators is basically how you regulate your body. All happens from here down. The upstairs brain is the master controller of that. So if you lose that function, you can just be totally out of control. That's number 1. Number 2 is the ability to tune into someone else. So at the moment Maria comes home and she's telling me about what happened at school, if I've had a bad day, or I'm really agitated, or I want this to be my perfect daughter, or I was rejected as a kid and I can't stand the feeling that my rejected child's invoking in me because I didn't want to think about my own rejection because I was just fired at work, or I was rejected when I was a kid, or whatever the issue is, and I can't stand it like that, then at that moment, I can't attune to her. This is what this area allows. This area allows you to literally tune into the internal experience of another person. Make a map in your own mind of not only the feelings that another person might be having, and that's called compassion, feeling with, but also to imagine what it's like to be in the mental life of this other person. That's called empathy. So attunement is the gateway to both those things. So it's this balance between rigidity and...
I want to just pause there for a second and just, I've watched this a few times, but for the first time, I'm making the connection to, we've heard about, it talks about how the mental health kind of crisis kind of peaked during COVID. And what I'm wondering as I'm listening to this is it because so many of us adults were also incredibly stressed? So when our kids are coming to us with their stress, it's just like stress meeting stress. And again, I can't overstate how powerful it can be when you are in your own sense of settledness, when your kid or a kid in your youth group or your children's ministry comes to you. It's not a coldness, it's not an uncaring, but it's, if your nervous system can be online in that rest and digest phase, it has an impact. It's not perfect. It's not like it's, oh, if I'm chill enough, they will chill. But it's very powerful. I've seen this happen again and again, where it has a contagious effect.
Chaos. This is called...
That's
emotional balance. This is the part of the brain we know from science allows you to achieve that. And this is the part of the brain, this whole talk is about how you develop this in your child. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4 is called response flexibility. Number 4, if you think about this area in Maria's brain, this is the area right here that allows you to take an impulse and put a space between an impulse and an action. Right? It allows you to choose all the different possible responses you have. Think about the various ones and say, you know, I think I'll choose that one. You know the marshmallow experiment? You guys all know that? Some people are not. So let me just remind you. A guy studied, I think it was 2 or 3-year-olds, gave them a marshmallow, said, hey, you know, if you can wait a little bit, I'm going to come back with another marshmallow. You can have 2 of them. And then he left. And then they just filmed the kids. And then he studied them when they're like 25, 30 years of age. The kids who did not eat the marshmallow did better in every aspect of doing better in their lives. Better relationships, better work things, better academic achievement, better everything. Better grades.
Marshmallows are that powerful.
Marshmallow.
That's because
it's important to eat 2 of them. That's it. So what's the deal? They had response flexibility.
Yeah.
They could say, you know something, I'd love to eat this marshmallow, but I think I'll wait.
So already at that age, they had developed
Already,
that
because this develops at 18 months of age. This
It doesn't stop developing.
Doesn't stop developing until 19 months. But
No,
I'm just kidding.
I think mine is still developing.
Right, it develops throughout the lifespan.
Yeah.
But the idea is it starts developing around 18 months to about 24 to 36 months. Right, so they were studying these kids that had it. It's directly related to attachment experiences. Now, obviously, temperament would also influence that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's response flexibility. Number 5 is the ability to calm fear. Literally, as I mentioned, there are these fibers that go from this upstairs brain down to the downstairs brain, the amygdala, and they squirt inhibitory peptides called GABA is one example. Gamma aminobutyric acid. You don't even know that. Why am I saying it? See, this is I've got so many hats on. Anyway, it squirts a substance to the fear part of the brain that calms it down. That's how you actually overcome fear. You don't actually, it looks like you don't change your downstairs brain, which encoded the fear. You teach your upstairs brain to interpret the context as not finding the downstairs brain response useful, and you tell it to chill out.
And that can come through relationship.
And that comes through relationships.
Okay. You may notice that he didn't get to all 9. And in fact, the video cuts out soon after we stopped. But if you want to go to that in YouTube, somebody lists all 9 of them, and I'm sure that's in his work. But I feel like, especially that fear stuff, again, you can imagine if your lid is flipped, it's just all anxiety. It's all, this is never going to get better. What's the point? The hopelessness, all of that stuff. Let me go back to my slides here and share. Okay, so here's just what we just saw, that hand model of the brain. So what do we do? How do we help the children and youth in our care to not only learn this? I mean, we've taught this to our kids, they've taught it to us. And it can be helpful to say, kind of, where are you right now? Are you kind of right here? Or are you, and if they're not kind of able to even reflect on that, then they're probably already here. So what do we do? What are some practices that and some approaches that we can take when this happens? One of the things that has really been helpful, and I'm going to share just some really specific and practical things that you can teach, and this may not be new to many of you, but these are some of the ones that have been the most helpful that I've seen work well, and they're all what are called DBT skills. So we all maybe have heard of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. That's talk therapy. And when you're dealing with children and youth, that can be helpful sometimes, but actually teaching them what to do and teaching them how to listen to their body and what their body is telling them can be even more helpful, because it doesn't require that higher level of kind of self-reflection. It's practice-based. And I think it's something that churches can incorporate into programming. Here's one that is a skill, and these are very, very widely available on the internet, videos as well as worksheets. And this is called the accept skill. And this is a good skill where they haven't flipped their lid, but they are anticipating something that's creating some anxiety or some distress. And you can see DBT, which stands, by the way, for dialectical behavioral therapy. And that is, dialectical relates to the fact that two things can be true at the same time. One, you're experiencing distress. This is really hard. And you can do something about it. You have skills and you are capable, right? So if something is on the horizon that is causing some distress, engaging in activities to distract. Distraction gets a bum rap sometimes because it's like we're just avoiding it, we're in denial, but distraction is very powerful and it's very helpful. It's not to be avoided. It's an important part of the process. Contributing, doing something for someone else, comparisons, thinking about how you've managed something that before, thinking about something from your past, generating a different kind of emotion. So if you're anxious about something, maybe you go do something completely different. You watch some cat videos or you watch a funny movie, right? Different kind of emotions. Pushing away, just don't think about it. Again, that's kind of with the distraction thing. Engaging with some competing thoughts, and then sensations, getting into your body with your five senses. One of my favorite practices to share with adults and kids of all ages is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that is simply, what are 5 things you can see right now? What are 4 things you can hear right now? 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste, or maybe 1 thing that you've tasted recently. I have a specific memory of my eldest coming in kind of around bedtime and was in the midst of some active anxiety. And we did 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you could feel that starting to subside. Again, none of these are magic tricks, but they are things that help us get in touch with our bodies. And so this is a good one for you're not quite in full distress yet. This is for when someone is in active anxiety or even some depression. This is, if you think about a scale of 1 to 10 of distress, this is like when you're up at an 8 to 10. Accepts is more of you're kind of experiencing a 5 to 7, but it's not really full lid flipping yet. So tip is one that we use a lot as well. T is for temperature. So I recommend that maybe you do this at your churches. Put some ice packs in your freezer in your church kitchen. If you're a parent, have that available in your own freezer. And when you sense that anxiety, you pull it out and you just have them put it on their chest. There's a whole set of kind of things that happen in your body that when you have cold or take a cold shower. That's very hot right now. I guess there's this trend of people dunking into really, really cold water, and it's supposed to be very invigorating and do all this nervous system stuff. What I understand about it is that that sudden cold activates your dive reflex. It's like if you were diving into cold, deep water, and that actually slows your heart rate down. There's all kinds of physiological things that happen with temperature. I is for intense exercise. P is for paced breathing. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. One is breathe in 5. The main thing is you want the exhale to be longer than your inhale. Paired muscle relaxation is just tensing and releasing. You notice that none of these are, hey, what's wrong? What's bothering you? Let's problem solve. This kid's being mean to you. Let's figure that out. None of that stuff, because they can't do that at this stage. This is all in the body. This is all taking place in the body. The next one I want to share with you is another DBT skill. They love the acronyms, and this one's pretty tortured, but this is called ABC Please. Let me talk about the please first, because I think that is probably easier to, it's just kind of self-evident. This skill is kind of not an in-the-moment skill, but something you incorporate over time. So this is how you build what they call in DBT a life worth living. which I admit is very difficult to do when you're in a sense of depression, because your energy is not where it needs to be. I mean, if you could do some of these things, you would. That's the problem with depression, right? But to the extent that you can, and you can see some of these are like physical illness, is the PL. So the L at the end of physical is part of the acronym. But anyway, if there's physical illness, if there's physical things, you want to treat those. You want to be as balanced in your eating as possible, avoid mood altering drugs. You want to get as much sleep as you can, which, by the way, and I agree with Lisa Damore on this, her contention is that it's not social media per se. I mean, in some cases, it may be social media that's causing some of this mental health stuff with especially teens and teen girls. But the reason it is providing that kind of mental health effect is because it's displacing sleep. Things that displace sleep, so they're up late scrolling on their phones, they're not sleeping. So for her, it's just like, that is the absolute kind of first thing that you want to focus in on. Very hard with youth and who want to, I mean, they're just on a different sleep schedule than, and that's physiological in their bodies. And then E is for get exercise. So that's the please part. Let's go back up to the top with ABC. Again, these are ideas that you incorporate over time. So accumulating positive emotions. Let me just get really personal with an example from our own life. My middle kid, who's 17, should be a senior this year, is actually sort of repeating their junior year. And that's because they were on medical leave for some of last year to deal with some of this mental health stuff. And this is something that, by the way, they are happy for this to be shared in terms of to help others. I always try to really honor that with my kids. If we worked really hard, we could probably get this kid to graduate in May. But school would be all that they are doing. And what we are realizing is that they need to accumulate positive experiences. That is more important right now than finishing at the same time as their rest of their age cohort. So this kid has a job and does volunteer work and loves to bake and, you know, several like, and that is that building a life worth living. Building mastery, helping kids set goals that are achievable each day. And trusting and empowering them to do that. That's build mastery. C is for cope ahead of time. And that is, okay, I'm going back to school next week. I'm anxious about it. Putting together an actual, they call it a cope ahead plan. So when you come home, what's the first thing you'll do? I'm going to hug my cats. I'm going to make some hot chocolate, you know, whatever it is. When you start to feel anxious at school, what will you do to cope? I will ask my teacher if I can step out in the hall briefly. I will grab my fidget and start playing with it. You are empowering them and helping them build a sense of mastery that they can handle what they are experiencing, okay? There's a lot more DBT out there, and I highly recommend all of it, but these three, I think, are some of the most helpful. And I'm looking at our time. I have a couple more quick things to share, but please start putting some, if you have questions in the chat, please feel free to do so that we can address those if you have specific questions.
Marianne, Sophie and I can look at the chat so you don't have to
Okay,
worry.
great. Let me go through a couple more slides. And while we're sort of in a pause, I am going to put in the chat, as I mentioned, I do have a newsletter where I write about these things regularly, in addition to lots of other things. And I put the link in there. Would love to have anyone who's interested in subscribing. I know I see familiar names on this call, so some of you may already be there. Okay, so let's go back to the slides, a few more things. These next few are about anxiety in particular. I think there's some overlap with depression in terms of these ideas. but they do come from a class that I took on parenting kids with anxiety. And the idea behind this slide is thinking about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how they connect with one another. And you see the yellow little triangle and the blue triangle. This is the child and the parent. So the child is having thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and the parent is having thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And you see the circle behind the two behaviors. These two behaviors are are mutually reinforcing, or reinforcing in positive or unhelpful directions, right? So when my kid is struggling, and then I start spiraling in, my kid's never going to graduate. We've tried everything, all this stuff, that just creates a loop, right? So we need to do our own work as caregivers. In fact, as part of this class, you could just create this yourself. There was a worksheet, and it was like, think about a time when you all were in distress together, or your kid was struggling. What were your thoughts? What were your feelings? What were your behaviors? What do you think your kids' thoughts were? What were their feelings? What were their behaviors? And start to pick that apart a little bit. Because as it says at the bottom of the slide, changing parent behavior will have a positive effect on the child-parent anxiety system. Again, is that magic? No, I wish it was. But it has been helpful for me as a parent and as a caregiver and as a pastoral leader to, sometimes we will do for others what we won't do for ourselves. And realizing that me dealing with my stuff and being as regulated as I can in my nervous system will help my kid. That gives me more permission and frankly, motivation to do it than just to do it for myself. So that's an important piece of this. The other thing that I want to say about anxiety is, this is a separate topic, so maybe we can talk another time, or feel free to contact me if you wanted to find out more about this. But there's this whole idea of attachment and regulation. And at different phases of a child's life, they are more in tune with their parent, which is called co-regulation. So if I'm chill, they're feeling chill, and it's this kind of give and take. Anxious kids hold on to that co-regulation longer than kids who don't have anxiety. And I don't mean anxiety, I mean diagnosed anxiety. Everybody has anxiety, but and that has been helpful for us because our kids are very tuned into us. And yet they're 15 and 17 years old. And part of me is like, well, are they not independent? Are they not kind of distancing themselves from us appropriately? They are, and they will, and that will come in time. But because they deal with anxiety, they are holding on to that longer than a mentally healthy, typical kind of kid, whatever that is. A couple more quick things, and then we can have some conversation. I'm sorry that the spacing on this slide is weird. I hope you can read it. There's a spectrum of response that parents get into when they're dealing with depression or anxiety. One is going too far into overprotecting, and the other is over demanding, right? So overprotecting is, you don't have to go to school today. Let's just skip that. You're anxious about ordering in a restaurant. I'll do it for you. Or kind of those accommodations that we make. And so what are some of the, you're going to be fine. Let me help you. And then the over demanding is, you need to do this. Just go. Like, get out there and without any kind of accommodation. Some accommodation is important and helpful. So, okay. And there's all kinds of responses, like maybe we get into problem solving mode. Why don't you email your teacher and ask for an extension? Set an alarm next time so you're not late, or invalidating their feelings. You shouldn't be scared. You've done this before. All your friends are going to be at this party, all that kind of stuff. It's very minimizing. So instead, here's a place to start is both of these, the green and the orange arrow. Radical acceptance of what your kid is feeling and conveying that that makes sense to you. I can see why going to the doctor would feel really anxiety producing. It's hard. You might get a shot. I mean, all those, you understand, you accept, and then the confidence. I know that you can handle this. And then again, some of these other skills can help build that mastery. But what we do is we go straight to confidence instead of, I mean, often we will skip over acceptance and go right to, you can do this. And it's really more of a command than a expression of confidence if we haven't paired it with acceptance, right? So acceptance of your kid's emotional response and saying that that makes sense, and then conveying confidence that they can cope with the situation. So that's what I got, and it is 10:50. I would love to kind of hear what questions you have, what responses, other kind of comments, either in chat or feel free to take yourself off mute and ask personally. I know that is kind of a
Marianne, what if you don't understand their emotions? You know, I think that's a hard thing sometimes. We don't understand where they're at.
Yeah. So you see that they're in distress, but you don't feel like you can say, you seem really sad, or, you know, you're not sure what you're validating, in other words. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my inclination would be to keep it very general and talk about what you see. This seems really hard right now. Then you're not putting an emotion on it, like you're sad, you're depressed, you're anxious, whatever.
So then you don't understand, you just have to acknowledge what you see.
Yeah. You're just yeah. And that can, and then I mean, and I've also kind of fumbled my way into there have been times when I've thought there's some of one thing going on, and my kid, I mean, they're old enough where they're free to call me out, and they're like, no, that's not it at all. And I think parents could, and caregivers could, risk being wrong in the service of, I'm trying to understand. And I think that helps too. Now, there are kids, and especially teens, who, I mean, my own 17-year-old is like, you're doing that empathy thing again. And they can see the kind of man behind the curtain, if you will, right? And what we're doing. And we just are playful about that, because ultimately that validate and expressing confidence is helps. It's hard when you got a kid with anxiety, because you can get into a pattern of kind of learned helplessness, where it's like, okay, I will, let me make this easier on you because you're going through a lot. And I think there's some of that that's helpful, but you want to work towards building that mastery, building those skills. And you need to do that with a lot of compassion for yourself and for your kid, for the kids in your care, because it's not an overnight thing. But that, anyway, that's what I would say about that. Other questions or comments? I invite you, in the 2 minutes that we have left, just to take a nice deep breath, take it in, and just as we learned in TIP, paced breathing, breathe out longer than you breathe in. So just breathe in and out. Let me offer a blessing to all of us as you prepare to go into the next session. Blessings to those of you who are parents and don't know what to do next. And blessing to those of you who are caregivers and seeking to find the next right step. And blessings to you who are church leaders, who are humans as well, dealing with your own stuff, even as you're seeking to lead people who are on their own journeys of good health. Blessings to all of us in a system that doesn't have enough resources, doctors, psychiatrists, therapists to meet the need. Blessings to those who feel like they need to keep up appearances because it feels too vulnerable to admit what's going on. And blessings to our kids and the tremendous challenge of growing up in a 24/7 world with violence on their phones and TV screens all the time. And blessings to all of us as a community, that we would sustain one another, that we would be truthful, and that we would be equipped to know ourselves and our bodies and our hearts and souls, and to most of all know that God is with us, even in the valleys and also in the in-between times. So thank you all for the chance to be with you. Love to keep in touch. And Michelle, thanks again for the invite. 1 year in the making.
This is great. This has been really helpful.
So blessings on the rest of your day, everyone, and hope we can connect.
Thank you,
Take care,
Marianne.
everybody.
We're grateful for this, and I know that was a lot of information, but we're going to take that with us. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Blessings, everyone.
My wheels are turning.
Yeah, good. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
So we have a few minutes before our next workshop. So just a few minutes between. If you are sticking here with us, what's one thing that you'll take with you from that? One thing that you learned that you think will be helpful in your life or your ministry, or
Michelle, this is Mike McCoy.
Mike?
I love the comment or the little tool she offered where she said you can tell a youth who is experiencing some kind of distress, your emotion is valid, but that is coupled with saying, and you can do this, to help build up that confidence so they know that they've got the tools they need to get through whatever this crisis is that they think they're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful because we often go into that place of overprotecting and over demanding. Maybe I go into the place of over demanding. So I think that's, yeah. Kim says, I'll validate your children's emotions, not offer solutions. That is tough. But Mike, I think you're right. Coupling that together, knowing you can do this, you have the resources, that's so helpful for them. Anything else you'll take with you? Well, let's take a few minutes. If you need a break, take a break, and we'll just play some music and